voluntary demographic form, okay? Voluntary being the key word. So I can't hold all of them accountable to doing so because I've never wanted to do anything that would jeopardize my relationship with my students and potentially make them uncomfortable. So I told them they were to feel free to pick one up. It was about a study I was conducting and part of a group that I was in here at Wallace. If they were willing to answer all of it, great. If they weren't, please refrain from doing so. And so as you can see, it's got a place for the name of the course, their age group, their gender, whether or not they're a fast track student, dual enrollment, race, ethnicity, native language spoken in their home, first generation college student, and whether or not they were a veteran. Then this is a brief overview of sample quizzes. On the far left is a sample quiz from, excuse me, Western Civilization 1, Western Civilization 2. In the middle you have Western Civilization 1, and on the far right you have U.S. History 1. Now, we're only going to take the time to look at this one spreadsheet, but if you would like more information about how I calculated percentages based on responses, you can follow that along in your QR code, but due to the time limitations and parameters of our presentation, I'm only going to take one and kind of go through it in depth. Now, it's important to notice that when you look at the total number, this is not the total number of students in my course. This is the total number that were willing to respond to the demographic form. So then each group is broken down accordingly. The number of responses I've got, the percentage of the total responses that they were, and so forth and so on. And I did this for every one of my courses that I collected data in. Now, when we started comparing absences, on the far left-hand side, what you'll find is these are non-quizzing days. On the right-hand side, these are quizzing days. History 101, or Western Civilization 1 here, is color-coded in blue, whereas Western Civilization 2 is color-coded in what should be orange, but looks a little red on our screen. Okay, go Wallace. All right, so with that being said, what we noticed is that on non-quizzing days, depending on when you were looking, one of the things that's going to make the difference is how many students responded that vary per course, right? So their voluntary response is going to make these charts look a little different. In general, Western Civ 2 on non-quizzing days had higher rates of absences than Western Civ 1. On quizzing days, though, they held relatively the same if you compare the numbers across the way. Western Civ 1 and Western Civ 2, even though there is obvious differentiation in this model, when you calculate the numbers, they're about the same. This is for U.S. History 1. Now, what I noticed about my U.S. History 1 class is, first off, the enrollment was significantly higher. I had more students sign up for U.S. 1 than I did for Western Civ 1 or 2. I can't definitively say why that is, but I anticipate because we have a large number of fast track dual enrollment students here at Wallace. If in fact you were publicly educated in the state of Alabama, you more than likely have already had a component of U.S. history based on state standards and guidelines. And so this may be a more in-depth look for these students and what they may feel like is an easier path into their first college experience. So I had a much higher number with regards to student load in US 1. If you notice on the left-hand side for non-quizzing days in US 1, in fall, we've got 2 days where we had no absences, and then 2 days where we had a very large number of absences. Fall sports, I teach a large number of athletes, really impacted that. Because if you take a good look around the dates when we were implementing, this is going to be around people's homecoming times and things like that with regards to our high number of fast track students. If you take a look at our quizzing days, it significantly drops off. And part of me feels like that's because of the fact that I did have a very high number of students who volunteered to respond that were dual enrollment and fast track. Being still held accountable in that K through 12 mindset of every day counts, truancy act matters, and I've got to show up. Next slide. All right, so if you want to compare them across the way for fall semester, you can kind of look at the data. I'm not going to take time to go into it because we'll do that for general observations at the end of my portion. This is just a breakdown of the spring data. As I told you, you would be able to find for every one of my courses if you chose to follow along with the QR code. And so it shows up for Western Civ 1, 2, and here you notice that the data looks a little different for spring semester, okay? Western Civ 2 on non-quizzing days and Western Civ 1 within reason, if you calculate it, it's not a significant difference, okay? There's no statistical significance. What I did notice about both, though, in general, is their absences on quizzing days either held the same or slightly decreased, except for our outlier here. And then this is for US 201, or US History 1. What I did notice, right, with regards to my spring semester, is that on non-quizzing days, my absences were relatively low. Now, it's important to also note that my class size overall for US 201 in spring was smaller. What I've noticed here at Wallace is that our enrollment tends to be very high in fall, and then some people choose to take a semester off, or something's come up, or maybe they chose to pursue a different path or not pursue history during their spring semester. What I did notice though, or maybe just not pursue it with me. With regards to that, what I did notice though in quizzing days is absences held relatively the same when you look down from non-quiz days to quiz days. And if you look at the dates leading in, we intentionally structured our project around the dates leading up to big breaks for our students. So we tried to norm as much as possible the timeline of implementation as well, but that's slightly varied based on instructor. This is just a comparison across the way. And then last but not least, overall observations. In general, what I found after I looked at my demographics and the voluntary responses, the students who statistically missed class the most fell into a couple of categories. One, they were a member of my Western Civ 1 or Western Civ 2 course. 2, they tended to be male. 3, they were above age 19. 4, they were first generation college students. 5, they were non-native English speakers. And 6, they were veterans. Now, once again, all of this is correlation, it's not causation, but my underlying question was, why are these groups, as an educator from my background, missing class the most, and how do we bridge that gap? Okay? Will?
All right, so much like Samantha and Jason, I would implement the quizzes at the beginning of class. They were already built into the grading scheme of the course, and basically it would be like a reading check. For my English 102 classes, we'll have readings that they're supposed to have done beforehand and then come to class to discuss. At the end of the semester, I would drop the 2 lowest quiz grades and then average all the rest of them together for their 4th test grade, just to give them a little bit of leeway if they're sick or something like that, so they're not punished for every single absence that they had. But the quizzes would be 1 to 3 open-ended questions about some element of the readings. It would be posed on the board at the beginning of class. Students would take about 5 minutes to answer the questions, and then we would use that to sort of generate class discussion and get the class started. There were a few limitations. Again, these are 2 different classes, or 3 different classes with different students, so comparing between fall and spring isn't really that practical. The data also did not follow a normal distribution. So all the correlation tests that I had to do were non-parametric. And then lastly, the sample sizes are quite small, so this data may not be generalizable, but I think it does give kind of an interesting picture. This is just an example of what the quizzes would be like. Like I said, just a few questions on a slide about some element of the reading, character identification, plot overview, literary devices, things of that nature. So let's look at the data. So this chart shows the number of absences per class session in my English 102 class in the fall 2023 semester. The portion that's highlighted in red is the portion when the quizzes stopped. I've sent out an announcement saying we're not going to do any more quizzes for the rest of the semester. And as you can see, absences did peak when those daily quizzes stopped, which implies that students were less likely to attend class when they knew that there would be no daily quizzes offered. But is that relationship statistically significant? If you look at the 5 class sessions before the testing period stopped, the answer is yes, there is some statistical significance here. The average absences with the daily quizzes was 7.5, and then that jumped up to 11.4 once the quizzes stopped. Using the Wilcoxon signed rank test, there was a statistical significance with the alpha level at 0.1. So not a very strong relationship necessarily, but some statistically significant differences between when the tests were conducted and when the tests weren't conducted, and the average number of absences. That wasn't necessarily the case for the spring semester, however. There was a less noticeable impact on absences. The average absences during the testing period were 5.5. It did increase to 7 absences. However, that relationship was not statistically significant. In the same case for my other English 102 class in the spring semester. No real noticeable difference. Was a slight increase. It went from 0.75 absences during the daily reading quizzes to 1.75 when the quizzes stopped. But again, that relationship was not statistically significant. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper, so I decided to do some qualitative research just to get the students' perspectives. I asked the question, I would be more likely to attend class if there is a daily quiz, and then have them respond. And as you can see in both of my spring classes, the majority of students reported that they were more likely to attend if they knew that a daily grade or a reading quiz was going to be conducted that day. Lastly, I just asked them, what would you like the researcher to know about the effect of daily grades or reading quizzes on your tendency to attend class? And I believe we have these quotes in the pamphlet, so I'm not going to read through all of them, but the responses were overwhelmingly positive. One student said, having a daily grade helped me get to class in the mornings because I knew if I did not, I would miss out on points. Another student said, if there is a daily grade, it makes me feel like I need to be in class. It makes me feel like the instructor cares that I'm there. There was one response that was slightly negative. They mentioned feeling kind of stressed out, knowing that there would be a daily grade or a reading quiz. So there was one negative comment that I wanted to bring up, but overall, pretty positive. Okay. So overall observations, there was a statistically significant relationship between the daily grades and the quizzes in the fall semester and attendance, but there was no statistically significant relationship in the spring semester. However, students did report that they felt more likely to attend class, or they felt a greater need to attend class if they knew there was going to be a daily grade.
All right, so here's my portion of the experiment. I just want to foremost announce that the Natural Sciences Department, a lot of our instructors already implement quizzes at the beginning of the course, because as a department as a whole, we understand that our course materials tend to be a little bit more rigorous. So with that being said, within my syllabi, we did meet the parameters and the expectations of saying we will have these quizzes. So the implementation of these quizzes is not a new concept. However, for this experiment, what we did is I totaled up the quizzes that were given at the beginning of class for 3 consecutive weeks. I then announced to the students that we would no longer be having those quizzes for an entire week, and this allowed me to measure for absentees. I then took it a step further, and I wanted to announce the 3rd week that we will be having the quizzes. However, they're not going to be given at the beginning, they'll be given at the end, and this allowed me to furthermore test for tardiness. And so the limitations is obviously between the fall and the spring, I had completely different courses. We also have to take into account the student lives, such as extracurricular activities. We have a lot of student athletes and fine and performing arts students. We also have a lot of students that have commitments, so the Fast Track Academy students and the dual enrollment students, they have commitments with their home schools and their clubs. We also have a lot of students with responsibilities. We have a lot of them that are parents, sometimes single parents, sometimes they're taking care of their parents. We also have unexpected events such as sicknesses. So now let me show you an example of my quiz. We won't stay too long on this. It's very standardized, typically about 10 questions. This one is specifically from 104, however, it is mimicked in 103 just with different materials. So now we can see my results. What you can see, again, for the fall, we looked at Bio 104, and this was a class list of 40 people. And we were to see that with the quiz, we have a 5% absentees. Without the quiz, we had a 12.5. And this is an overall of 7.5% difference in quizzes, which is huge and significant. Whenever we looked in the spring, again, this is with Bio 104, they had a class list of 31, and we've seen a 6.5% absentees with the quiz. Without the quiz, we've seen a 12.9 for an overall difference of 6.4, which is significant, both in fall and in spring. I won't stay too much on this slide, but this was the measurement of tardiness. So you can see a 5% difference here, a 3.2% difference in just implementing the quizzes at the beginning versus the end of class. So we'll move on from there. Now I wanted to give you some hypothetical statistics. This is the fun part, okay? We want to conclude everything by saying relatively, within the Natural Sciences Department, there are about 42 courses offered in the fall. Let's assume that all 44 courses filled up with the max capacity of 44 students. This gives us 1,848 students. So if we used my statistics that I got for attendance, we would calculate that 92 students would be absent with the quiz versus 231 students without the quiz. And this is an overall difference of 139 students just within one department. We could even take it a step further and we can look at the tardiness and see that there's 92 students tardy with quiz 184 students tardy without the quiz. And when I say without the quiz, I mean at the end of class instead of at the beginning, with an overall of 93 student difference within one department. So overall, my observations were very positive for fall and spring. Now, if you want to, you can scan the QR code and you can go through and you can look at all of these quotes. These quotes come from reputable and well-experienced instructors within my own department. We have our department chair right here, Miss Beth Williams. We have Teacher of the Year, Miss Jackie Donaldson. We also have Miss Shannon Quick. And then we can go to the next slide. And this is going to be Susanna Heinze, which also has a YouTube channel, Science with Susanna. And I urge you, please, to scan that QR code and read their thoughts, because they're all positive and correlate with our group's data on implementing quizzes. So now, in the final analysis, the efficiency of utilizing assessments to impact attendance did appear to yield mixed results within our department. 2 instructors noted a positive difference. The remaining 2 did not see a significant impact, and this inconsistency within our project may be contingent upon various contextual factors. However, we're ending it with this. As college instructors, we have witnessed firsthand how even marginal enhancements in attendance and punctuality can profoundly affect student outcomes. And these seemingly minor adjustments ripple throughout their academic career, shaping their discipline, engagement, and overall success, which ultimately helps shape the trajectory of their lives beyond the classroom, which corresponds with our mission statement that Wallace State Community College is committed to learning that transforms lives and communities. So we thank you all for joining us and sitting through our presentation. And now we open the floor for you guys. Do you have any questions or concerns for us to answer? All right. If not, thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Good morning, everybody. You gave me a thumbs up, Haley.
There's a break.
we are going to go ahead and get started with our second presentation. So go ahead, guys.
Good morning. I'm Casey Harvin. I'm a psychology instructor here.
I'm Sarah Muncher. I teach in the Diagnostic Medical Sonography program.
My name is Justin Robinson, and I'm one of the music instructors. Today we're going to be presenting to you an assessment technique called standards assessments and how we incorporated that into our classes this past year. So standards assessments are a quick, repeatable, and flexible way to assess foundational material in courses. And to break that down a little bit, standards assessments are focused on foundational concepts only. So the goal is to expose students to concepts that will be used throughout a course or throughout a module or a section of the course, and then later built upon. Secondly, they're flexible, so these types of assessments can be incorporated into a course in numerous ways, whether that's as quizzes at the beginnings or ends of classes, maybe short homework or classwork assignments, as well as in a short section of a larger assessment, possibly a summative assessment, or in numerous other ways. And this was one of the main reasons that we chose this topic to look at, because we're in such different fields of sonography, psychology, and music. We thought it would be easier to incorporate into these different fields using something that was very flexible. And after testing these different types of assessments, we kind of found that it could be used in any field, no matter what the application of the field might be. Next, standard assessments are repeatable. We know that repetition is the key to learning, and repetition will help the students become familiar with the format of those quizzes or the assessments that we chose to use, and also become more familiar with those foundational topics. And then lastly, standards assessments are quick. We tried to shoot for about 10 to 20 minutes per assessment, and those can be standalone, where they're incorporated by themselves as a formative assessment, or they could be used, as we'll see, as part of a larger summative assessment alongside additional material. So the purpose for us using this approach was to reinforce that foundational material that was going to be covered throughout a course, and specifically it was focused on the average and underachieving students. We've all had those students in our classes that are the top tier students that are going to get and understand the concepts no matter how it's presented and no matter how it's assessed. So this specific assessment didn't really focus on those students. Our goal was to help those average and underachieving students get more exposure to those foundational materials and then hopefully have a better rate of success later on. Our hypothesis was that as a student is exposed to foundational material more, that student will achieve higher and more consistent scores on advanced material that builds on those same foundational concepts. Some of the benefits we are expecting to see from the beginning is that those average and underachieving students, as they get exposed to that material more often, they will learn those foundational concepts and then have the opportunity to practice them on those assessments and then hopefully succeed on those later assessments. This can also provide the instructor with alternative ways to grade, which we'll see in some of our specific courses. And then lastly, the benefit would be that depending on the specific topic being covered, it can allow the instructor, depending on the importance of that topic, to change the passing grade or change the rate of success for those specific topics. Some of the potential drawbacks we knew we might see from the beginning was that it can make additional work for the instructor. As you have these assessments that you're having to be repeatable, you obviously want to have different questions on those assessments. So having to create additional assessments for these students obviously makes more work on the front end. And then other drawback we knew we might run into is student frustration. So if a student continually takes an assessment of this foundational material and continues to fail over and over again, we knew that might be a point in which it frustrates students. So to show you more detail on how it worked in our classes, I'll pass it over to Casey.
Thank you, Justin. So Justin mentioned that standards assessments might create some frustration for students, and as I discovered, it might create some frustration for instructors as well. So I implemented standard assessments in my psychology courses. I chose my Psy 200 courses because these are general psychology courses. They're commonly very populated, so it gives us a pretty solid sample size. The mastery standard that I chose was formative assessment of research methods in psychology. Now, spoiler alert, it does not stay as formative assessment, but I continue to use research methods in psychology as the standard throughout the entire course. I think this is a very important assessment that students need to understand that there's a very, very important scientific foundation in science, and they need to see that repeatedly throughout the course. So the method I used was retrieval practice and interleaving. So I just kept bombarding them with research methods questions in psychology over and over and over again. And most importantly, throughout the entire course. So from day one to the very last day, they're seeing research methods questions. My groups I had 3 groups. They're all comparable in size. I had 2 groups from the fall, 1 group from the spring. And again, the idea is repetition. Let them see that psychology is a science over and over and over again while I have them. So I initially thought this would be a great idea to implement into formative assessment. You can see where this is going. I initially structured this as a bonus assignment where each week students would see a graph from Turner's Graph of the Week. The graph would be oriented in content for psychology purposes. So they'd see a graph, something like this, and they would complete a document this is the standard form document, by the way. They complete a document that looks like this. It has 5 levels to it, level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It would be modified each week to fit the content of the graph, but in structure, it's the same thing each week. Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. And I even implemented this into the grading aspect of it. So as a bonus point assignment, students had to correctly answer the level 1 assignment, the level 1 question to advance and potentially earn more bonus points into level 2. So they had to correctly answer level 1 and level 2 to get to level 3, and so on and so forth. Level 1 and level 2 representing the most basic research methods, abilities that we have in psychology. So I thought this was a great idea. I mean, it's bonus points, so this is going to be wonderful. And then I got data. So out of the 80 potential students I had in the fall, I had 16 even attempt it. That was frustrating. And if you're looking at this data and thinking, well, that doesn't look too bad, this data is garbage. Absolute garbage. It's extrapolated. I mean, I got nothing out of it, but that's education. I mean, that's education. Try things, fail, adapt. So that's what I did in the spring. I adapted from that failure. I moved my standards assessments into summative assessments instead of formative assessments. I have 4 modules in general psychology. Each of them features a module test. So I moved these research methods questions into the module tests at the end of each module. And I utilized Blackboard's test pool abilities, which was actually pretty nice. I don't have a ton of great things to say about Blackboard, but that's one of them. It allowed me to shape and mold these pools of questions. And I could assure that each time students were taking module tests, they were going to see research methods questions over and over and over again. And here's the good data, I think. So I took the mean test scores from fall 1 and fall 2, and I took the mean test scores from my one spring class. Now you'll notice that fall 1 has a bunch of asterisks by it. Actually, I take the median for fall 1 because, as you can see, a lot of people didn't take the test for some strange reason. So I had to take their median because their average was awful. But fall 2 had a lot of good students, took all their tests, everything was great. And spring 1, we were doing great until last week, and 4 students didn't take the test. Not sure why, still working on that. But from a comparative point of view, things are going pretty swimmingly. Here's what it looks like in graph form. My big emphasis was I want to see if there's a big change as we go through the course. I'm not as concerned about Module 1 test scores because I don't think standards assessment really had an opportunity to be utilized at that point, and I don't think we'd see the results of it until later on. And I think we start seeing the results a little bit here. The orange bar is spring 1, and the darker blue bar is the fall 2 course. Those are the 2 courses I was really interested in. And I don't know if there's a significant jump in test scores, but there is a pretty good jump in Modules 2 and Modules 3. I'm really excited to see what Module 4 test scores end up because you might be able to see over there that students typically do well in Module 4. That's because it's drugs, clinical psychology, and social psychology, things students are really interested in. So I have a lot of hope. Just telling you the facts. But I have a lot of hope for this. And I really do think that standards assessments might be useful in psychology in a formative format. I implemented it the wrong way, clearly. But I do think it could work in a formative assessment. But I know for sure that I'm going to continue using this standards assessment in my summative assessments throughout the summer. I would imagine Canvas will allow us to do the same kind of things we can do with Blackboard. So I envision continuing this process into the fall as well. It's still a lot up in the air, but there's one thing I know for sure. It's in my classes, students are demonstrating a much greater understanding of research methods as we have our class sessions. So I'm going to continue with this. Even though my formative assessment kind of failed, my colleagues over here had a lot more success.
Alright, so unlike Casey students, my students will pretty much do anything for a bonus point. So I had no problem having full participation in mine, in standards assessments in diagnostic medical sonography. So in my fall semester, I applied this with my GYN sonography class. There were 13 students in there. This was their first semester in the program. So they've had college experience, but this is their first semester in the actual sonography program. I gave 5 quizzes. Out of those 5 quizzes, I then applied that to the exams. They were tested on the same images, and all of my questions in the quizzes were ultrasound images. They built on one another. We started with the most basic thing they needed to know about an ultrasound image, and we built onto that to normal anatomy, pathology, and so on. And after each quiz, I reviewed all the exams all the images before they took that next exam. Students who maintained a 70 or above average on all the quizzes received 2 bonus points on their final exam, and they were very excited about that. Alright, so data for fall semester. The averages for the quizzes stayed in about the low to mid 80s, so not too bad, but not great. So then I took the attempt statistics just for those images, and when I tested them on the exams. So on those images, we went up to the high 90s on all 3 exams. So obviously, they did better. So after we had quizzed them and reviewed them, the averages definitely went up. All right, so then we moved on to the spring semester. Same class, GYN sonography, but we had 15 different students. So not the same students. They were in their second semester in the program, but it was their first semester seeing GYN sonography. This time I gave no quizzes. So they received their information or the images through lectures, in their textbook, in their workbook, in PowerPoints, things like that. But I did use the same images from the fall semester, just a different approach in how they were given. So we have our little ultrasound thumbs down, for those who can't read ultrasound. But so my first exam, I was like, okay, maybe it's not gonna make that big of a difference. We're still in the 90s. And then we hit the second exam and we dropped significantly there. Third exam went up a little bit from that second exam, but still not great. Not as great as that fall semester. So here we laid it out. That exam 1, like I said, only about a 3% difference in those averages. Exam 2, about a 30% difference. So definitely did much better with those quizzes given. And then exam 3, about a 10% difference. So I definitely saw a difference in those averages there. So in conclusion, standards assessments definitely proved to be beneficial in the DMS program. And actually students from that fall semester, in their spring semester, they were asking me for quizzes. They said that they really enjoyed them. It kind of helped, not enjoyed them, well, they enjoyed the bonus points. But they said that it really showed them what they weren't grasping on their own, what they thought maybe they knew, and then they really weren't. So I definitely will be implementing this, especially into my first and second foundational courses. I'm not sure how it will apply as great to our more advanced courses in their third and fourth semester, but I definitely see some benefits to it in my foundational courses in those first and second semester. So now I'll hand it over to Justin.
So I incorporated standards quizzes into my music theory courses this year, both music theory 1 and 2, and I made it part of the actual overall grade. So for music theory 1, it was 30% of the grade. Music theory 2, it was 20%. All the concepts that were covered on these quizzes were extremely foundational to the course. If they did not understand these concepts that they should probably not pass the course, because that's all stuff that's going to be built on in their later music theory courses in that sequence. So the way I incorporated them, this is what the students saw on part of their course outline at the beginning of the semester. The students were expected on these different standards quizzes to pass each one with a 90% accuracy rate. So a much higher passing rate than would be traditionally accepted as normal as 70%. And the good thing about this is that the students succeeded on their first attempt. They were done with that quiz. They didn't have to take it again. If a student did not hit that 90% pass rate, they had the opportunity then to retake the quiz until they reached that 90% accuracy rate. The grade they would receive in Blackboard if they succeeded on their first attempt is they would get a 100 for that quiz in Blackboard. If they succeeded on the second attempt, it would be a 90. Third attempt was an 80. And then any fourth or subsequent attempt, they would receive a 70 in Blackboard. The benefit for the students for this is they get exposure to that material more, and so they're building their understanding of those foundational concepts. And then even if it takes a student 10 times to pass a quiz, they're still guaranteed to pass that quiz in the course, or that section of the course. And then it just helps them reinforce that material that they didn't understand at first. The downside to it is that if they at any point didn't pass any of the quizzes, if they never achieved that 90% on even one quiz, they get a 0 for that entire 30% of the course because they could not achieve that 90%, that high understanding of these foundational concepts, and then they would not be eligible to have their final project graded, which was 10% or 20% based on the course, and so they would have to retake the course. So some high stakes there, but I think it proved worthwhile. So here's how it broke down for the two courses. In Music Theory 1, I originally started with 9 students. I had 2 that dropped out after the first standards quiz in about the second to third week of class, so I did not end up including their data in this because they didn't take any of the subsequent standards quizzes, but I had 7 students remain in it for the whole semester, and of all 7 of those students, they all passed all 7 standards by the end of the course. The standards assessments were used as formative assessments, so it was just short, about 10, 15 minutes is what it took most of them for most of the assessments, and they did that usually at the end of classes. I gave them about a 30-minute time window to complete it, even though I would only take them about 10 to 20 minutes to make sure they had enough time if they wanted more time on those quizzes. In addition to that, what you'll see in the data is the midterm grades and the final grades will be on the far rights of the graphs, and those are the summative assessments. They only got one chance on each of those exams. In Music Theory 1, the midterm covered both those foundational concepts at that same foundational level as the standards assessments did, and it covered standards 1 through 6 for the midterm. And then the final in Music Theory 1 covered all those topics in a more advanced level, and it was comprehensive and covered all 7 standards. For Music Theory 2, it was similar. I had 3 students continue onto that class, and we had 5 standards overall. The midterm covered both foundational and more advanced material and covered standards 1 through 4, whereas the final in the coming weeks will cover all those topics at a more advanced level. And for both of these courses, they were asked on the standards assessments to both identify and classify these different musical concepts that they were studying, and then most of the assessments also asked the students to recreate those concepts on a musical staff given certain limitations. So as you see this data, a couple of things you'll see. Along the bottom, you have all the different standards quizzes for each class. This is Music Theory 1. So you have standard quizzes 1 through 7 on the bottom with both a blue bar and an orange bar, and then in between the standards quizzes and the midterm and final, you have the average for all the standards quizzes grouped together as well. So for Music Theory 1, the blue bars you see above each standard quiz was the first attempt only, so that would be equivalent to if it was just a regular quiz given in a class. That was their average grade for all the students. The orange bar is the average for all attempts for all students. So the overall average for the first attempts for all standards quizzes was an 81.6, and the average for all the attempts was an 82.4. So not a huge difference between the first attempts and the total attempts on the actual standards assessments. But when we go over to the midterm and final that were summative, the midterm average for the course was a 91 for all the students, and the final average was an 88. So this led to an overall 7-point higher achievement on those summative assessments than when comparing it to the formative assessments for Music Theory 1. And for Music Theory 2, seeing similar results so far, although this course is not complete yet. The blue bar, again, is the average of the first attempts. The orange bar is the total attempts for all students. So the overall average on those first attempts was a 71 on the standards assessments, and the overall average for the total of all assessments was a 75.6. And then the midterm, which they've already taken, the average was an 89, so this one averaged 13 points higher for those summative assessments than the formative assessments. So my initial conclusions for music theory is that it seems to be that the summative assessments are scoring higher, so this seems to be working. However, that's with a couple of addendums to it. Obviously, my course size was fairly small, so I would need a lot more data to really reinforce that and confirm that. And then I did not have a control course this year yet, so in the future I plan to incorporate some sort of control course where I don't incorporate this and see if those summative assessments still end up being higher. And some of the things that in the future I would like to survey the students on would be is, do they study differently for those shorter formative assessments than they do for those summative assessments? I think that's pretty important. I think a lot of students probably think, oh, this is a smaller quiz, I don't really need to study for it than I might for a final or midterm exam. And also, how does testing anxiety play into a shorter quiz versus a longer exam? Our overall conclusions, we do think overall that this seems to be working, but we obviously need more data and more experience with this before we conclude that fully. Some of the problems we did end up running into in this was student engagement. As Casey mentioned, extra credit did not seem to work for his class, whereas Sarah experienced something different. So trying to find a way to make sure all students engage. I didn't end up having that problem with my class because they had to engage or they wouldn't pass the class. Another thing we experienced was procrastination, and in my case in particular, a lot of the students, they would take it that first time, maybe the third or fourth week of the semester, and they just would leave it there and not retake it until like the week before their final exam. So trying to find a way to encourage them to take that earlier on. We also noticed a problem with studying. A lot of my students, and I'm not sure if y'all experienced the same thing or not, admitted to not studying before retaking the quizzes, which I just don't understand. I give them their quizzes back so they have in front of them what they missed and what they need to study, but they just like, oh, I'll just give it a try again and see what happens. So I don't understand that. And then the last thing that was a problem was time. Just creating multiple versions of the same quiz obviously takes more time. Some of the solutions we think we have to that is engagement. Is maybe if we know the students are not going to engage with that extra credit, don't use it as extra credit, incorporate it as part of the course, unless the students have shown that they will engage with that extra credit. For procrastination, possibly create some sort of timeline of subsequent retakes before they just automatically fail the next retake, so the students are encouraged to do it sooner and continually engage with that material until they pass. Studying, we thought maybe we could have some sort of review session they were required to attend before retaking it, or encourage the students to review, make sure they understand what they missed on those previous quizzes before retaking. And then the time problem will become easier the more we teach these classes. Obviously, we'll already have those resources, so it will not be difficult to recreate those. We just have to edit small questions. So as far as future use is concerned, Casey experienced that it worked well in question pools and blackboards. We're guessing it should work well in Canvas with the question banks that are incorporated into that LMS. And as far as campus-wide implementation, we experienced that it works both in academics and applied technology. However, it seems to work better in major specific foundational courses. So we're going to try to keep implementing it in those courses and try to find ways that we can implement it then into maybe later courses, or possibly reviewing even concepts from earlier courses in those later courses to keep reminding the students of those foundational materials. That's all we have. Any questions? Yeah.
Your quizzes that they have to reach a certain score, was it the same quiz?
It was the exact same format, exact same types of questions, but different data for each question each time.
I have a question. Why do you think we've seen such a big difference between the academics and the applied technologies? Is it because the applied technologies, they're specifically going into that, whereas academics were kind of overall generalized? What would you guys think on that?
I think definitely with the applied, that's what they want to do, that's what they're going to do. Their entire day is around sonography. That's all they're learning right now. So I think that definitely plays a role in it. They kind of know what they're doing for the rest of their life.
Coming from the academic side of it, I think the biggest issue with this from the academic side is that with the applied technologies, approaches to it, there are clear skills you have to have in those areas to advance. With academic field, it's not as obvious with our content.
That answered my question perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started with our third presentation. So,
All right. Thank you guys for taking time for our guests, especially on your Friday, for being here with us to hear our presentations. But my name's Christopher Bynum. I'm one of the nursing faculty here at Wallace. I'm very happy to be here. And my role kind of came about because if you're not familiar, we're expanding. So we have expanded toward Aniana with nursing. So I'm kind of helping facilitate that. So that's been a fun journey in addition to TLA. But my partners will introduce themselves in just a second. But our focus here is going to be meditation. Each of us have very different cohorts that we tested on, and we tested in different ways using different types of meditation. And our overarching hypothesis was, with the use of meditation, whatever capacity that was, that the students would have a decrease in anxiety and an increased performance. You should all have a flyer by now. If you don't, we can get you one. But that will kind of serve as a guide as we're moving through our program, but also afterwards too as a reference for some of the things we'll talk about. We will individually present our data, our methods that we utilize to collect that data, and our outcomes, and then in the end we will have a moment for a brief Q&A. All right, I'll allow my team to introduce themselves.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. My name's Tiffany Shipp, and I teach psychology here at Wallace State. In my classroom, we teach about mental health disorders as well as stress, anxiety, depression. And for our PowerPoints, we chose meditation to introduce to our students before and after they test to see what the test scores would be. I teach Psych 200 and 210, so we do teach this a little bit in my classroom. And so we'll talk about different methods of meditation here in a minute. So it's nice to meet you guys. All right, and Brittany?
My name is Brittany Clements. I'm an adult ed instructor. I teach GED in correctional facilities. They live in a stressful environment, so I was hoping this would benefit my students greatly. Ironically, I started my career off here at Wallace too. I was actually the first fast track program student that ever came to Wallace.
Thank you. Initially, just some pondering points that we want you to consider throughout this. What is meditation? So you might have an idea when you think about meditation what that is to you or what you've seen with whether that be yourself from personal experiences in movies. Some facts about meditation. Hopefully you'll learn some new things that maybe you didn't know before. Different types of meditation, different ways you can, whether they be more physical or mentally involved. How students can benefit. Each of us, as I mentioned, have very different cohorts that we tested this on, so I think you'll see those differences represented in the data. And then our data results from the different classroom settings with our students. So meditation is going to be defined by Cleveland Clinic as a practice that involves focusing or clearing your mind with a combination of a mental and a physical component. Mine was more of a mental, which I'll explain to you in a few minutes, but some of us used strictly physical and some more so mental. And then Psychology Today too, I put this on here because mindfulness was a big thing I focused on with my nursing students. I don't know if you all have heard, but I hear quite often that our exams can be a bit challenging. So they tend to get real worked up. So there was a bit of I had to prep them before we ever entered that, just because their testing environment is so structured and it's very routine. And to disturb that with anything, whether it be something we feel like would help them or not, then I really needed to preface that just so they're not completely thrown off, because their exams weigh a lot and those little things will throw them off. But mindfulness was something I focused on with stressing to them and hopefully reducing their stress on those exams and increasing their exam scores. Excuse me.
Right, so we had a few facts about meditation that we wanted to share we thought was very interesting. There are 9 popular types of meditation. Obviously, there are more types of meditations, but there's 9 popular types that fall into the 3 main categories. We have mindfulness, meditation, spiritual, and focus. Okay, and the meditation is an experience of relaxing the body and the mind and awakening the spirit. You want to focus on your inner self and rule out any outside interference when you're meditating. It encourages a deepening of awareness and facilitates a deeper understanding of oneself and others. So during that time, you want to focus on your what your goals are for the day or for your life, and just focus on your inner self there. It is now a mainstream practice in the United States with over 30 million people that actively practice some type of meditation. There are thousands of meditation techniques developed and practiced for over 5,000 years. And each technique and skill can be learned as well. Okay.
You said okay. So I want to talk about how students can benefit. Time management skills I know is a huge benefit on tests. Most tests that all of us give are timed. So when you can clear your mind and put out all of the stressful points, you can start focusing on your test when it begins versus taking the first few minutes of your test to get yourself together. So meditation should help with that. Stress reduction, when you can leave the outside world outside and just come into a classroom, be able to focus on a subject, you're going to retain more of the knowledge. Better sleep. This definitely comes in when you're releasing the chemicals in your brain that help you retain the knowledge. Serotonin and things like that can be thrown off if you don't get enough sleep, but that can all benefit with meditation.
Okay. I didn't know we had fancy additions there. Thank you. So music meditation is going to be my specific type of medication. I also have been doing that. I usually talk about medications, not meditation. So I tend to say medication when I'm supposed to say meditation. So if that happens, we'll just, with music meditation, I played a song. Has anybody heard of Weightless by Marconi Union? Has anyone heard? Okay. So I'll play a short clip of that. There's a lot of research that went into that, but that choice, and there's been a ton of different studies performed on that, the use of that song. But with music meditation, hopefully with a stressful situation, such as with test anxiety, we're focusing on centering ourselves, as she mentioned previously with the facts about meditation, and hearing that therapeutic music prior to entering the testing environment or prior to starting their exam would have lowered their test anxiety and increased their performance. So I tested on 2 different cohorts. I tested initially on, in fall, I tested on Nursing 114, which if you're not familiar with our curriculum, that's the halfway point. So that's a 3rd semester student. My next set of data for spring was on a 1st semester student. And a 1st semester nursing student and a 3rd semester nursing student are 2 very different people. So they have changed a lot, and by the time they get to 3rd, they're also more adapted to our routines and our expectations and things. They're in their groove as well. A 1st semester student still is making that transition from traditional classes in their prerequisites to a nursing course. But with our 114 cohort, what I did was I had on the left side, round 1, I set up Blackboard surveys, and I had students rate their anxiety from 0 to 10, and I did leave it as a fill in the blank, so some of them felt the need to rate much higher than 10. But I asked them to rate their anxiety before and after taking the exam. Also, I didn't compile this in here just because of time's sake, but on the round 1 surveys, I included 9 questions that tested the students on general test anxiety concerns and whether they felt like that affected their study and their performance personally. That was overwhelmingly positive that they did note that about themselves. But with my data here, you can see that the blue line is going to be the pre-response, and then the orange line is the post-response. So we did have several declines here, even in the round 1 without music. But here you can see there was a pretty significant dip from our pre-response with our post-response level of anxiety. On the left is going to be my number of responses. So this was voluntary. I had it in Blackboard set up to open right before their exam, so as they were getting sat down they could do it, and then after the exam. So it did require them to go back and do an extra step after they finished. So I didn't get, typically our cohorts are roughly 130, so I would average 80-ish responses most of the time, but It depended on the student. I did have some literature down here as well in our presentation. Both of these come from health science databases, and both of them were focused on different nursing students. So these were graduate students, the majority of them were in nurse anesthesia programs, but still a very similar student and similar structure. So I thought that was relevant. My second set was, as I mentioned, on a first semester nursing student. So this was much different, and even the perception in the room was much different. I had several comments, such as one student asked from the first semester that they asked, "Are we going to turn off the scary music now?" So it's not really scary music per se, but they did not perceive that well in person either. But as you can see on the data here, the pre-responses, we had high anxiety and it did decrease here, but we had a spike post with round one even without the music, and then here our pre-responses, we kind of peaked here, but our post, we had way more than we would previously with a 10 or higher of anxiety. Lastly, I asked them on the post survey if they felt listening to therapeutic music before the exam was beneficial to them, and I listed these 5 options here. And the first semester here, you can see many, many more put that they disagreed or strongly disagreed. So, but my third semesters liked it. There was a lot of, I didn't open it up to general comments, but some students did just talk to me after, and third semester did have several good comments about that. I do not plan to pursue it additionally in the future, just because I think it requires so much prep for them to get adjusted to that beforehand. But I do hope to, I plan to take this to, I've not presented this to our faculty yet, and I do plan to do that because we do a lot of, when we have conferences and things, we present poster projects, so I do plan on utilizing it in that capacity, so looking into it more and maybe getting other points of view, because I know other people have done similar things, but in terms of implementing this in my specific cohorts, I don't think I'm going to do that moving forward. I do want to play one quick clip from this video just so you can hear the sound. So this version here is 10 hours, so you can just put that on and leave that. So I would just click in, and I would just click in a random spot and allow it to play. But there are different points. It goes through different things you would hear, you know, kind of like at a spa, and then there are different instruments that come in and out. One piece of literature will say about this that it's so relaxing if you listen to it for any length of time. You're not supposed to do it while you're driving. It's dangerous to do that because it relaxes you to such a point. So very interesting if you look into all that. All right, Tiffany.
Okay. I'll control it, it's fine.
Are you sure? Okay.
Okay. All right, so I chose to do mindfulness meditation in my classrooms. And so mindfulness meditation is based on the mind. It can be done between 2 and 5 minutes, depending on what the individual person would want to do. But it's increased awareness, acceptance of living in the present moment. It's what you likely think about when you think of meditation, is closing your eyes for about 2 to 5 minutes, focusing on your inner self, allowing yourself some peace, and eliminating any outside stress or anything that would cause you to be not be focused on what it is you're trying to focus on. You can either do it during music like Chris did with his students. I did not. I chose to be in complete silence. Mindfulness meditation is the practice of acknowledging the thoughts in your brain, choosing where you'd like to redirect your thoughts, or focusing on what you like. For my students on their exams, you observe the thoughts as they appear and take note of any patterns or sensations that come up in the body. Okay? So my students like me to relate a lot of real life things to, you know, when I'm teaching in my subjects for psychology. And one of the things I thought was interesting was the amount of celebrities that actually talk about using meditation in their daily lives. Meditation is a mental exercise. It trains attention and awareness. It's shown to help increase focus, reduce stress and promote calmness. It helps with creativity, peace, and coping with loss. So Lady Gaga is very open about her fibromyalgia, and she's a songwriter, singer, and actress, and she said that meditation helps calm her down, relaxes her, and helps with her pain. With Eva Mendes, she's an actress. Meditation helps her on projects that she tries to pick. She tends to meditate when she's picking a role for some of her movies. Katy Perry is a singer-songwriter. She's openly talked about her relationships with men and how she would go from one relationship to the other, and it was very painful for her. She just had a child recently, and so she has talked about how it helps with her find moments of peace. When you have a new baby, you know, it's hard to find that peace and tranquility, so she takes the time to meditate and give herself that 2 to 5 minutes a day or longer. And then Julia Roberts is an actress, and she's had a lot of loss in her life, and so she says that meditation helps her to cope with loss. So a lot of people do use this in times, the spiritual element of meditation, usually when they lose a loved one, is when they usually will do the meditation at that time. Okay? And so Oprah Winfrey, we're all familiar with her. She talks openly about health and wellness as well as mental health. And she says it's that way of being still with ourselves, coming back to the center, recognizing that something is more important than you. It's more important than the work you are doing, and it brings a kind of energy and intention that we've never had before. Okay? All right, so my classroom meditation. So in the fall of last year, I decided in my Psych 200 class, I had an 8 o'clock class coming right off of a weekend on a Monday morning. So for that 8 o'clock class, I decided for them to go ahead and I asked them to close your eyes for 2 minutes, focus on your exam, focus on how you were studying, and then we're going to take the exam after that, and I'm going to compare the score with the Tuesday morning class that came in at 8, whereas I asked them to not meditate, to just go ahead and take their exam. And then I compared those test grades. They actually scored 10% better, the ones that meditated before. And then as a group, the average increased, but individually I didn't see a whole lot of increase, but as an average I did. My hypothesis was that it would help them, and I feel like it did, but maybe not in the classroom. I probably wouldn't in the future ask all my students to meditate. But in the spring, I've switched it up because I thought, well, coming off of the weekend on a Monday, maybe I should try in the spring to do a Tuesday at midday, you know, just to see if the scores would change. So in the spring, I did a 2-minute with my 210 class and at 11 o'clock, and I compared their scores as well, and they increased 4%. So to me, it didn't make that much of a difference whether it was an 8 a.m. on a Monday or 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. But in conclusion, I most likely will not use meditation in my class, but I will continue to teach about it and the benefits of alleviating stress and anxiety and depression for my students. And then I have this data result chart here. My averages went from 65% to 75%. Of course, in my class, as you can see, 2 of my students decided just to turn in their study guide, and that was going to be their exam grade. So I had to include that because it was 2 points, but that's what brought my averages down. My classes usually are around 90% percentile. And then in the spring, it was 79% to 83%. They actually all took the test, but the test that I gave in my class, I allowed them to have a makeup day, so they may pull up some of those scores. But in the spring, which was just a couple of weeks ago, we went ahead and did the meditation. So overall, I feel like it's beneficial for most people to do meditation, maybe not so in the classroom because they're already really stressed out and nervous. So I don't know that meditation really helps them because I don't know that they really took the time to focus and relax. But those were my results, and I enjoyed giving the test out and taking the data results from my classrooms. Okay, Brittany.
Hi. So my form of meditation was the Superman stance. So it's the power of posture in psychology. This has not hindered on the legacy of the Superman pose, but it is the Superman pose. So Superman pose, feet shoulder width apart, fists on hips. You look up, and we did this for 1.5 minutes. I told them to picture success in this exam. I told them to think about what they could do with this in the future. And as you can imagine, it went over like a ton of bricks. But we'll get there. But this has shown a lot of success in a lot of areas. This has a lot of research backing it, showing that it does improve scores, and a lot of people do it before speeches. So I wanted to start by, this is my grading scale. So because I'm in such a different field than you guys, I don't really have I have a classroom, but mine's behind bars. So it's a hugely different environment. Also, our testing is gravely different. So when you look at these scores, I test in these 3 subjects. This is the first test that I will give them. So all the information that they test on, they probably haven't seen in years. Most of my students are older than me, so it could be decades since they've seen math, algebra, you know. So this is given also in our first or second time meeting. So I've just got to know these students. They fill out paperwork, and then they go straight into testing. So that makes a huge difference. And this test is timed, so they have a specific time limit, and you know the time is clicking down. It is not unusual for me to see my students on an E level, which is like a second grade reading level or math level, which makes a huge difference in my grading. So in my chart reflecting that, it's hard to see these scores. So this is my control group, and that's my Superman stance. But as you can see, it really hindered my students. So over here, you can see the scores. Most of them didn't score around 500, which is typically average. But when you get down here, that's when we see a 3rd, 4th grade level. The ones that didn't obviously scored just a little bit better, but 10 points on this test actually is quite a huge amount of information. So, and I did this at the Blount County Corrections Facility. I do have a classroom, but like I said, it's still in lockdown. There's still a lot of noise. There's always a lot of noise in the jail. And I did this as 2 separate classes. These are 3 students. And I did this for each. I scheduled for each, but I probably could have compounded my data in just to 1 subject. It would give us a better graph. But I wanted to show y'all the structure of how I do my class. All right. So my results obviously do not reflect the fact that we thought this would bring up the grade. Does anybody have an idea of possibly why this might happen? Nobody? I call it the gel mentality. So I asked them within the first or second time ever meeting them to do something that put them in a vulnerable position, right? It's prudent to know that all these were males, the ages between 24 and 45 years old. So when I asked them to be vulnerable without them being able to build the trust that they need, which is very important in my setting. So I didn't have enough time with them to be able to ask them to be vulnerable because I had just started this class. But I do think meditation could help if you ask them without them needing to be in a vulnerable position. Maybe, like I would never ask them to close their eyes. Now I've learned that. That's something that they would not want to do around their peers. They don't like people being behind them. There's a whole different mindset. So now we have rapport though, and now we have a relationship and I know a lot more about them. I think asking them to do stuff like this would be different, but I probably would not do this again in my class either. Thank you. Any questions?
So I know this was geared towards students, but have y'all possibly created a committee for faculty?
Would you like to head that committee?
Please.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
John, just a quick question for you. So your pre and post analysis, were those questions embedded in your assessment, or were they just a separate thing they did before they took the test and after?
So it was before and after. It was not within the assessment because ours, that's part of the thing that made it difficult to get responses because our tests are so structured and timed specifically to how their board exam is timed. So I had to give very specific instructions. I put it in bold. I sent an announcement to the board, this will not affect your time on your exam because that was a stressor initially. So yes, it was different. It required them, a lot of times it would log them all the way out, so then they had to deliberately log back into Blackboard. It was a short person. So. Anything else? Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Melanie Patterson. I'm a welding instructor here at Wallace State, and I'm presenting today along with Dr. Dingwa Zahn from biology, Vicki Leggett from adult education, and Dr. Thomas Messersmith, the history instructor here. We're going to be talking to you today about our project. It's called Groupthink, using open-ended group discussions to deepen understanding and build community. That is a lot of words. What does that mean? So basically, we want to know if we force our students to talk to each other in small group discussions, will it help improve their grades? Will it help them to understand the material just a little bit better? We all use different approaches, and you're going to see that as we go through, implemented this in different ways. Our hope was that open-ended discussions would result in deeper conversations among the students and just much better understanding of the material. We used test grades, and we also used surveys to measure these results with our students. A non-measured idea, another idea of this, was to foster community among our students. And that was especially important to me as a welding instructor, because welding is a solitary activity. Every student has their own booth, and there's a limited amount of exposure that they have to other students while they're welding. So I especially wanted to see if my students could become more of a community through this project. We asked them survey questions before and after we implemented the group discussions. We asked them, do you think open-ended questions are going to benefit you in this course? We asked them their personal preference between multiple choice and open-ended questions. And we asked about their comfort level with meeting with their peers in a group setting. So in welding, the way I implemented the group discussions is that in my WDT 104 class, I broke the students down into 10 groups of about 3 or 4 students each. And I gave each group a list of 10 questions, open-ended questions pertaining to the material that day. And I sent the groups all over the shop. And it was mostly random groups, but I did put one strong student in each group just to make sure they stayed on track. And I gave them 45 minutes to talk about the list of questions, and I told them, take your textbooks. I said, take your laptops, take your phones, and look this stuff up and really talk about it. So at the end of the 45 minutes, they came back to class, and I also told them before they left, now when you get back, you need to choose a group leader, because when you get back, I'm going to have your group explain to the class one of these questions. And of course, everybody said, which question are we going to get? And I didn't tell them that because I wanted them to talk about all the questions and not just focus on one question. So that's the way I did that in my class. How did it turn out? As you can see, not much of a result. So the first 2 tests, these scores are on tests where they did not take part in group discussions. And test 3 and test 4 were taken after they did group discussions. The scores were higher by only 2.98 points after the group discussions on average. So not a huge difference, but it could mean the difference between passing and failing for some students, and it could mean the difference in a letter grade for some students. Oh, sorry, wrong way. As far as the survey, I didn't break down all of the survey questions, but the most interesting thing I found was that after we implemented group discussions, more students chose that they were extremely comfortable at the end of the semester. They took part in it. They realized, this did not kill me, and I made some friends, and I learned some things. Many students believe that open-ended questions were helpful for them. However, given a choice, they still would rather have multiple choice questions than open-ended questions for their exams. So to wrap up my portion of it, for welding classes, there was not a significant difference in grades after the group discussions. Now this was only 4 tests. So, and then I didn't put the slide up there, but for the spring semester, the grades were exactly the same. There wasn't even 2.98 points difference. So more data is needed to really know if this is true. The thing that I found successful was the community building part of it. So when the students came back into my classroom after their group discussions with each other, they were talking to each other, and the students were having conversations with students that I'd never seen them talking with before. And when I started the lecture, they were much more willing to answer questions. When I asked a question, they didn't just sit there and stare at me. Some people actually talked, and they were more willing to ask questions. So from that aspect, this was a huge success for my class. So thanks for your time, and Dr. Zahn.
All right, good morning, everyone. Oh yeah, you guys are about to be done. Good. Well, just stick for the for the remaining 30 minutes, and we'll be good. So I'm Dingwell Zan, and here I teach biology and anatomy here at Wallace State. So the part of my study was to determine whether using active group discussion in my flipped classroom would lead to an increase in exam performance of my students. Okay. So this, I apologize for the small font. On the top, it's a screenshot of one of my favorite educational papers studying the effect of active learning strategies in flipped classroom. It doesn't matter, the title doesn't matter. In it, they found two things. One, the first important thing is their exam performance among those students who experience these flipped classroom and active learning activities, their exam score drastically improved compared to control. One. Second, just as important to me, students felt that those activities actually helped them learn better and, more importantly, connect the actual material on the book to their future career. And in this case, it's human anatomy and physiology, so most of these students are pre-healthcare fields. That's all great and nice. However, a lot of other studies have shown that active learning have no impact whatsoever on their performance. So the question remains for me, can I use active learning and more group discussion in my class to benefit my students, right? So this is how I did it in Biology 103 class. It's not anatomy, but it's like biology science entry course. So the goal of this study, apart from the exam score increase, is to encourage the students to really think beyond the biology textbook so that they can in turn have a better and deeper understanding of a certain given topic, right? So the example here is in the genetics section of Biology 103. I talk a lot about this one human disease called cystic fibrosis. And normally I would focus on the disease mutation, how many different types of mutation, genetic variation, and inheritance pattern, which is on their book. And this semester I added questions like this. Here it says, patients with the same mutation have different disease severity. And I would ask the students, why do you think that's the case? If gene determines everything, why do you think they have the same mutation but have different disease severity and presentation? It actually varies a lot. So to answer these type of questions correctly, students have to first talk to each other because they have no background, talk to each other, and then really think critically and think beyond the textbook, right? So that's one example. Another one is, to me, I firmly believe that in science or pre-healthcare fields or healthcare fields, the scientific policy is just as important as science itself, if not important, in my opinion. And we might really be educating future policymakers right here on the campus. So for that reason, I added those policy-related type of questions. The example would be right here. Discuss the potential pros and cons for newborn screening for cystic fibrosis. And more, do you think our healthcare should cover that kind of plan, right? So these are the strategies that I used in my class, and now let's take a look at the results. Again, I apologize for the small font. There's a lot of numbers in this box and whisker plot. It doesn't matter. We only really care about the middle part, which is the median. Here you have 72, 72, 70, exam 4. Now exam 3 is prior to the intervention. You have control group and active discussion group. Exam 4 is after they implementing these active discussion. So as we can see, to start with, prior, they both have 72, 72, which is very rare for two different classes, you know. Their median score is 72. And after intervention, the control group, I wasn't doing anything, they experienced a 2 points drop in their exam score. Now think about it, in large part, that might be because exam 4 is mostly on genetics and inheritance pattern, and usually that's a harder topic for 103. Now, with the active group, they experienced a 2-point increase in their median performance. then that's not all the data you have means, right? So I have to run, on the bottom you can see the numbers. I run the analysis for their average score, and 71, 72, it looks like there's a difference, but the p-value is too big. There's not really a statistically significant difference at all. All right, so to summarize, while engaging in those active group discussions did not lead to a significant increase in their average score on their exams, it did, I think, it did have a beneficial impact on a part of the class, especially the middle section, the 50%, that's the median, right? That's reflected by the 2-point increase in that median score, especially if you think about the control group. They dropped by 2 points, whereas the active group increased by 2 points. And if you compare that, it's not really like sound method, but if you compare that, that's like a 4-point difference, you know. Right, so this semester and this year, I'm mostly teaching 201, 202, that's anatomy and physiology. So I already start using these type of methods for active learning in a flipped classroom. I anticipate similar and hopefully more promising results, you know. And one question that remains, and it's a big question for me, I ask these type of questions a lot, how can I use these type of flip methods and better support students who are not quite as prepared? Because we all love those great students who come in and they know everything already prior to you teach, right? But this is a big question. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Vicki Leggett, and I'm an instructor in adult education. I teach GED and English as a second language off-site at Topre in the Link. In adult education, we have the unique opportunity to prepare and encourage adult learners who are returning to pursue higher education goals. Never doubt your importance as an educator, because I have classrooms of students who are diligently working to have the privilege of being a student in your class. Many of our students work 12-hour shifts and then immediately attend a 3-hour ESL course twice a week. These students have strong work ethics with a drive and desire to be a part of your future programs here at Wallace State. As a part of our study, I will hypothesize if using open-ended questions in small group discussions can be a beneficial way to facilitate language learning in the classroom setting. Grading protocols are different in adult education, so I chose to survey 2 ESL classes and compile the data to determine the results of the study. Demographics of the 2 classes include 9 men and 10 women. The age ranges are 25 to 54 years old. The ethnicity ratios are Hispanic, 16 students, Japanese, 1 student, Thailand, 1 student, and Ukrainian, 1 student. The surveys were written in English as well as the native language of each student through the use of Google Translate. The surveys were given in class, and then we broke the students up into small groups. I needed to ensure that each group contained limited English proficiency students at the same time as more advanced English proficiency students. The groups were then given 10 open-ended questions with that day's learning activity, and we had them collaborate and come up with solutions to the questions. When they returned to class, we had the group leader share the results of each group, their responses with our classes. This process was repeated the following week and with the same instructions, and at the end of the second discussion, a follow-up survey was given. At a later time, we also repeated the study following the same procedures, and we're going to compare the results. So in the first study, we asked the students to rate their opinion in what they thought the value of using an open-ended question with group discussions. And the results were 5.37 out of a possible 10. In our second study, the scores were elevated to 6.19 with a slight increase of 0.82. These scores indicate that a little over half of the students felt that it is beneficial to use open-ended questions to learn new information. Students were then asked if they preferred multiple choice questions over open-ended questions. And they determined that they prefer to use open-ended questions in class when you're learning new material to have discussions, but they always like multiple choice questions better for testing purposes. In the last question, we asked students to rate their comfort level using the open-ended questions in group discussions. And this increase, I saw the largest difference of 1.74 from the first study to the second study. And this could be because the students are becoming more familiar with the concept of open-ended questions and how they're intentionally being used in the classroom. However, more data is needed to assess long-term effects. I noticed informal, non-measurable observations. I saw a lot more meaningful conversational exchanges using English skills. Using open-ended questions in small group discussions, it provided a forum for my students to practice new vocabulary with their peers together in conversation before we came into class. It seemed like it made them more comfortable to talk out with other people instead of being called upon by the instructor. Another goal was to provide an opportunity to encourage less fluent students to practice vocabulary orally with their peers who are more fluent. Using open-ended questions provided this opportunity to encourage limited English proficiency students to participate in class discussions when they would otherwise not volunteer to answer questions unless called on specifically by the instructor. So in summary, this is my class. I forgot the slide. This is my class. In summary, survey results indicated a minimal overall increase from the first to the second study. These results could be an effect of becoming more familiar with the topic and how it is used in teaching, increasing each student's awareness of the concept. However, more data will be needed to assess long-term effects. But as an ESL instructor, I will continue to utilize open-ended questions with the group discussions to facilitate English language learning in our classroom. Thank you. Dr. Masterson.
Hello, everybody. I'm Thomas Messersmith. I'm a history instructor here, and I am going to talk to you about the way that I approached this question. I chose to focus my project on the potential of using these open-ended group discussions to help lower performing students. I already use a lot of discussion in my classroom, but I chose to do the idea of this open-ended discussion in order to see if that could help them raise each other up as well. And so my hypothesis is that open-ended group discussions could benefit these lower performing students because it could cultivate both a personal understanding and a culture of asking questions. And so we're going to see how that worked. So as you saw, we have been using these surveys, and so initially when we looked at the utility of open-ended group discussions, people seemed to be mixed. They said, maybe it's useful, but it's a 6.43 out of 10. They thought it was going to be maybe okay. When asked if they preferred multiple choice versus open-ended discussions, they actually tended to prefer discussions, but again, it was only by a slight margin here. And then when we talked about their comfort level, they again seemed maybe a little uneasy. Some said, yeah, sure, no problem, and some people were adamantly against it. And so it blended out to a 5.9 out of 10. So when we went through this and we looked at the follow-up data from the surveys, and I'll get to the grades here in a minute, but when we looked at the surveys, we saw that first off, there was an increase, a small increase, of people who thought that this was useful. They thought that this was actually a good thing. It went from that 6.43 to about 7.33. When we talked about multiple choice versus open-ended, well, they kind of went backwards, and they said, well, maybe we prefer multiple choice. Again, it was still just a small change here because they were just slightly on the other side of that, but they did prefer that. This is possibly because some of the higher performing students didn't want to necessarily do all the extra work that came with these open-ended discussions, because as you can see here, this is the type of thing that they would be discussing. It's a document from the Great Depression, and so they're having to read this before they can talk about it. So there's that. The comfort level of it did increase, but only by a little bit, so it's fairly negligible. But again, some people it did increase a lot, and some people it decreased, and so that's where we are. When we look at the class grade changes, though, this is where things get interesting, because if we talk about the overall total grades, we average everything else out, it looks like it didn't change that much. There's a negligible difference here of the overall grade. Same thing with the overall exam grades. But if you break it down by those who had a D or F before the experiment and those who after, we saw that those who had a D or an F, their total grade increased by 17.73 points. And their exam grades increased by 8.83 points. So this can't just be accounted for by doing extra homework, right? Now, obviously, we can't take all of that increase and say that it's because of this, because we have this idea that if you're failing, you need a little bit of a kick in the pants, and they got it, right? And so there's that. But just talking to these students afterward, because I did talk to some of these lower performing students, we saw that, in fact, they did feel like this helped them raise their grade. Those who had a C, we see that there's basically a negligible difference. They essentially did the same. Those who had an A or a B, they actually went down a little bit. But again, having talked to the students about this, why do you think that is? They said, well, I'm in a comfortable position, so I studied for that class harder than I studied for this one, right? And so that explains that. But the impact here, even though there's little impact on the overall class average or those who are already making an A or a B or a C, we do see that there's a notable positive impact on the students who are making a D or an F. This may indicate that lower performing students benefit from the analysis and discussion of topics from a peer through the group dialogue, and this is confirmed by anecdotal evidence. I will also say that they felt more comfortable asking questions, as we saw from these others as well. They felt that once they had done this discussion, we always tell them, if you have a question, somebody else probably has it too. Once they're doing that discussion, they see that, oh, that's actually true. And then they feel more comfortable actually asking that question. And so I do think that it is helpful from that community building standpoint, but also for just the lower performing students to see that they're not alone. And so when we talk about this overall, even though overall grades have little impact, lower performing students may improve. It can improve participation and group learning environment. And we see that different approaches are both necessary and beneficial for different programs. When we look at our everybody all together, we see that we can use this in many different ways. We have to use it in different ways because the welding instruction is not the same as history instruction. But the fact that we can use this to help build this community and take people who sometimes, in the case of welding, have literal blinders on, be able to take them out of that environment and be able to talk to one another, this can raise their performance, even if not on a statistical grade level, on a comfort level that can have meaningful impacts outside of the classroom. There are, of course, further avenues of exploration. This does need to be repeated. We can't just rely on this data overall. We do have to do more, and we can take this and use it in different ways as well for other programs. So we have, welding, biology, adult education, history. We'd love to see that in something like psychology or English or anybody else. So, but I think one really interesting thing would be the applied technologies. Would be one of the most interesting ways to apply this. So, thank you for listening. Do you have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody.